from in the world. Today it's a little bit of an unusual session. Generally, we do Google Workspace specific kind of chats. This one, Kevin kindly raised his hand from the community and said that he'd like to do a bit of a presentation on some of the things that can derail businesses, whether it's a startup or an ongoing business. So with that, I will hand over to Kevin to do his introductions. Kevin's from a Google partner, Dido over in Virginia, I believe, in the US. And I've known Dido for a long time, worked with them on a number of projects over the years, and really happy to have Kevin presenting this afternoon for us here in the UK. So with that, I'll hand over to Kevin.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So yeah, when I was asked about it, I'm always looking for topics, and I speak on just a ton of different things, many things for Google. So, but when you're doing a presentation to a bunch of Google Workspace experts, you don't necessarily want to patronize them and do stuff that they might know about. So I thought this might be an interesting idea. I did mention to Paul that this is the first time I've given this speech publicly. I've given it privately to 3 people. It started out about 10 years ago as a journey with my illness, and led to this here. So I hope you enjoy it. The idea behind most of my speeches in general is they're never something that you can go just Google and say, what are the top 20 items for this? So like, for example, if you ever attend a speech that I give, perhaps on like something like public speaking, I'll expect that you've already read the top 20 public speaking ideas. Then I'm going to say, here are 20 more. So when we get to the end, I've actually got a document that's got some more ideas that are less formed, that talk about business things if there's any time. But for this particular one, basically, I'll talk about it from, kind of laying the groundwork. But a little bit about me. I do work at Dido. I am a cybersecurity expert, computer expert. Been using computers since I was in the single digits. I had my parents' phone lines cut before I was age 10 for doing, various nefarious things. Today, by the way, Commodore celebrates their 40th anniversary with the Commodore 1000 announcement. So I'm feeling very old today. I'll just tell you guys that very much. But please do reach out to me on LinkedIn. I love meeting new people, love talking to them, love helping other businesses, and especially living vicariously through other entrepreneurs. You can read lots of neat things about me. Very proud this year to be the Mary Latinsky Lifetime Achievement Award winner for my work helping making the internet safer for all, and lots of other fun stuff there. But I will start with this. Now, I did originally write these slides for Atlanta, and I notice here that I have Atlanta written here, so that's wrong. I should put in fair London or UK. I'm not sure actually where Paul is based, especially because he has a background for New York City, so he's just confusing me. But the quick background is that in 2015, I was in Mach 37, a cyber incubator. Things were going very, very well. We had just oversubscribed our fund for the startup, and really just had things going great. But earlier that year, I was at Carnegie Hall, and if you know my background and you know that I do things like race cars and helicopter chases and things like that, I was terrified to be in the balcony, just inconsolably terrified. And I had to talk myself down from that. But that turned out to be the first symptom that we can cross-correlate to my illness. So by the end of 2015, I was effectively extremely ill. By the beginning of 2016, I was almost incapacitated. And by the time May of 2016 came around, I was transferred to Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, Maryland, and given 3 weeks to live. So pretty serious disease, very, very rare. For over 9 years, I was patient 1 at Hopkins. That's how rare it is in the world. I was the 39th person diagnosed and the first person medically diagnosed. Today, there's probably about 45. There's one that I can chat with that's fairly verbal, but I'm the only one to ever go back to work. And the vast majority were diagnosed after death. So, this is my story about how the Chaos Monkey affected my business. And the idea behind it is, that you guys can learn some stuff from it. I do call it mischief managed with my health. And I will tell you that, you can ask me any question. If there's something I don't particularly want to answer, I'll just demur on not answering it. But I do talk publicly about my disease. I do sit on I sat on, I do not do it anymore, a board of an organization that helps people. And for those who don't know, the unicorn is the sign of rare diseases. The idea being that, if you're a doctor and you hear hoofbeats, you look for a horse, not for a zebra. So that's the idea behind it. So many rare diseases are difficult to get diagnosed with, difficult to get treatment for because of their rarity. So what I've put together is something I call parachutes. The idea behind it was coming up with things that worked and then those things that didn't work while I was running a business, and to give you some background for it. So my first parachute is this one, but are there any questions from anybody before I jump in? Molly, you can feel free to interrupt me, or Paul, if you're available. I know you're streaming as well, but are there any questions from anybody before I get started? All right.
Nothing yet.
All right.
Oh,
Stephen.
Actually, Stephen, yeah.
I don't know if I missed it in the intro. Are you happy to say what the actual diagnostic is? What is that rare disease?
So I will type it in the chat and I will say it as well. So it's called the anti-DPPX paraneoplastic neurological disorder. And
that's why you don't say it that often. I get it now.
I'm thinking I'm typing it wrong. I'm having a bad day when I can't type that. Neurological disorder. There is a book and a movie called Brain on Fire from a wonderful lady, Susanna Cahalan. She was a New York Times reporter that had a similar disease. It's basically something that blocks a receptor in the brain, and then your immune system attacks you to try and unblock it. So to give you an idea, of May of 2016, I was down to two-word sentences, unable to walk, talk, or effectively see. So it was pretty debilitating and pretty rapid on its onset. Brain on Fire, I have not actually read the book or seen the movie. It's just too close to home for me, but I've talked to Susanna and I know her. I know the basics of her story and things like that as well. And I know it's a good one for those who aren't aware of paraneoplastics. So, all right. So I will start off first with just the parachute that failed. I do refer to this as the prepare for an absence. So the tomorrow story is pretty basic. I was running a startup. I was running another company as well. I was a consultant as well for several federal agencies. If you called my office and got any of my staff or my assistant, they would say, I'm sorry, Kevin's not in today. Do you want me to take a message? He'll get back to you tomorrow. Now, at times during that, I was at the critical care unit in Johns Hopkins. I was not calling people back tomorrow. I came back to something like 10,000 messages. That's not an exaggeration. And I think there's a lot of it where my staff was going through like stages of grief. We were doing very well, and then all of a sudden I got very ill and went in for a surgery, and then basically never returned to work for months and months. Ended up at for those who don't know Johns Hopkins, it's up there in the world as far as research hospitals. But the things I want people to think about is, what's your plan if you're ill? Are you empowering people? Like for me, it was very parabolic because I had staff, I had money in the bank, we had contracts, we had lines of credit. But for example, people would call about projects and nobody would deal with them because they were waiting for me to come back and give a blessing or a green light or give whatever level of permission. So I definitely realized that I'm very type A. I always felt like I gave people the permission to do things, and especially the permission to make mistakes. And, but they were dealing with a lot of things, grief, as well as just my absence as well. I do, like, for example, I would go on vacation and tell people kind of as a joke, I would say, make more money than you lose while I'm gone. That was kind of my overarching instructions. And bug me when I'm on the beach with a margarita at pain of death. But, those two rules were pretty much the main rules. But that became to me where I started not being operationally important, I purposely made myself, I made myself operationally important, but not operationally critical. I would start telling people, do not make me a blocker. I would start telling my staff, what decision did you make? Not kick things to me for a decision. Again, just do that. Maybe test it with vacations and things like that. But if you aren't prepared for an absence, this is probably the number one parachute that helps with a particular illness. And I'm sorry, I think I've got phones ringing, trying to get rid of that. But all right, fail well. This is one that actually I talked about on a podcast recently because it's so often quoted wrong. Many people, myself included, have heard the term fail fast, fail often. The problem is that the full quote is fail fast, fail often, fail well. And that fail well is so important. I think there's also another one that's getting more traction lately, but many people have heard the phrase like the customer is always right. That is not the whole quote. Anybody here by a raise of hand know what the full quote is? Stephen.
The customers are right on matters of taste.
Yeah, it means that they can order whatever food they want. They can have whatever condiments on it. They can buy whatever ugly ass couch and artwork that they think they like. But that's the only thing they're right about. It's not a carte blanche that they're always right and can abuse staff and things like that. Anyway, as an engineer, something that I didn't realize and something that irked me was I would see people like run a startup and then it would fail. And then they'd run another startup and they'd get $1 million in funding and it would fail. And then they do another one and they get $10 million in funding and it would fail. And they do another one, they get $100 million in funding and it would fail. And the reason they got those 4 companies is it's a numbers game. And the VCs, for example, especially that industry, wants people to fail fast, fail often, and fail well. The fail well is what those people that are getting more money the next time they go back. They failed well, and it's a numbers game. So the VC says, you know what, you did great. I'm going to throw 10 times the money at you, and we're going to try it again. I love telling the story of KEC. I was at a demo day for the incubator that I went through. The demo day is when all the graduates show off their company to VCs. And I was not driving at the time, so I went over there very early. I was helping the startups with their murder boards and getting ready for the presentations. I also then got all of the badges. A lot of people that go to those type of events are the same people month to month that come out and visit the startups. So there's a big giant box with like 800, badges in it. So I'm setting up tables and putting linens out and setting all the badges out and putting them in alphabetical groups so that people can find them. And about an hour before the event, a gentleman comes walking up and I said, what VC do you work for? And he goes, wait a minute, how do you know I work for a VC? And I said, well, nobody else would show up to a black tie event in designer jeans and a t-shirt. And the gentleman was like, oh my gosh, I didn't know it was black tie, I'll leave. I said, don't worry about it. You're a VC. You could be at this event in your underwear and people will still bring you hors d'oeuvres and champagne because you're the reason these people are doing the demo. So anyway, he reads my name. He realizes, he's like, I know your name. And he goes, wait a minute, I know a guy who's bad-mouthing you. And he starts telling me the story. And my lead investor for the fund that I shut down was bad-mouthing it. I got to tell him the story that we returned that person's checks. That and the BC gentleman from KEC was very interested in it, but he gave me the advice. He went and talked to some people there, verified my story. We had taken care of every staff member, every employee, every customer, every contractor, et cetera, and shut things down as gracefully as you can when you have a terminal disease, effectively. And he verified it. He basically came back and did 2 things. First, he gave the quote that's on the screen. I won't bother reading, but it was something I've learned. I probably had 200 hours of meetings with that person, and then to find out that they were bad-mouthing me. Now, I didn't tell a lot of people that I was ill. We didn't tell them why we shut down. We just sent the checks back with a form letter, effectively saying, we regret to inform you we've closed down raising of these funds. Thank you for your interest. Here's your money's enclosed, kind of thing. But he was made whole. He got all his money back, etc. No, there was only 3 people that lost money: myself, my business partner, and the incubator. And but the key point here is we failed fast. He handed me a business card and said, whatever monies you're raising, we're in, because I failed well. So just something to think about. If failure is not a bad thing, especially if it keeps you from doing other better endeavors. There's a gentleman I know that has a great idea, but for 10 years, he has been pushing it. And I think it's a waste of his energies. And that's what they're trying to do, is get the people not to waste their energies. All right. By the way, any questions or anything? Yeah, fail forwards. I like that, Jeremy. That's very good. Let's see. Are there any quotes in here? Anything I got to think? Let's see. First computer was a VIC-20. Yep. Thank you, Stephen. Yeah. So Commodore's, anniversary 40 years is today. Yep. Atari. We've got Yeah, that's where I wrote that. Let's see. If time allows, what made it where you had a better recovery if that was identified? So I will answer that question, Alexander, because I think it's also important for work, and that ties in very nicely, actually, to this one here. The first thing is that I'm basically a stubborn son of a bitch. No insult to my mom, but I'm a compliant patient, but I pushed myself. I wanted to go back to work. I wanted to do things. And so that set me apart from other people. I will also tell you that my language was so damaged that I would sit there and play with Words with Friends tiles, 7 little tiles, moving them around just to try and remember words. And I play Words with Friends, happy to play with anybody here. My average score is in the 28s. That's fairly high. I could not put together 5 scoring. I mean, I couldn't put together 3-letter words. I was trying to, and so I didn't relearn my language, but I think with what the damage to my brain, I was able to rebuild pathways to my language. So I was able to build that up. But I've actually had a lot of talks with some patients that have had some relapses from Alzheimer's and similar, diseases that impact the brain. The best way I can describe it, especially if anybody here in this audience has a family member or somebody close to them that's impacted by these diseases, is the best way I can describe my language skills is it became the equivalent of, you're talking and you have a word on the tip of your tongue and you're like, it's right there and I can't think of it. That was every single word. So you're trying to make a sentence and you can't remember if you started with "the," and you're trying to just say something like, for lunch today, I want a sandwich, and you can't remember the word lunch or sandwich. It's that frustrating. And it's frustrating as well. Sometimes there's lapses, like, I've had this disease now for 10 years. It normally rolls off the tongue, and I've got to scroll back up to see if I even wrote it right. But I think I did. Paraneoplastic neurology. I did write it correctly. Yeah. But earlier, I wasn't sure if I was writing it correctly. The other thing that I did, and this is not easy, the doctors were very sad about this, and I do have a slide about this later on, is that I had a journal at that time with 55,000 technical journal entries and about 6,000 roughly personal journal entries. So I had effectively, more than 61,000 pages worth of my own writings to go back through. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the Mento slide that comes up a little later on. Customers are stupid, which is why they're asking for help. Yeah, I think that's, I don't know that they're stupid. I think it takes all different types to make the world go round. And something that I always say with my business is that when people call, one of the number one things they tell me, in fact, Paul got to hear about a customer that was hacked right before this call. And so I was escalating it literally during the technical vetting to make sure everything was ready to go for the speech. But, my normal phrase is, to thank them. They usually say, sorry, I'm bothering you. Sorry, I'm calling you. And I'm like, thank you for calling me. This is how I pay my bills. This is how I put my kids through college, et cetera. This is my God-given talent. Just because computers isn't yours, that's okay. So that's something I do recognize. I do have some business advice if we get to it about different personality types as well. Yeah, some customers don't have common sense. That's okay. I mean, like, for example, another business advice that we do in the technical world, I do a logic test with every single person that we hire that's going to be in a technical field. The logic test is fairly simple. We give them the following instructions. We say, okay, you're going to have 7 minutes and a piece of paper or a laptop, whatever your preference is, and you have to do the following. You have to write the instructions you would give to an autonomous vehicle to get from one point that to another point. You need to write down the instructions, and you need to write down the 2 points, and then you need to write down the steps. We repeat that 3 times for them. We've done this for over 20 years, by the way, long before Tesla and real autonomous vehicles were a reality. And what we want to see is, how do they attack the problem? Now, I will tell you, we have had people break down crying from this test. We have had people fill dots on a piece of paper. We have had people get up silently and leave. We have had people attack leadership, like physically pushing them over this test. But what the whole thing is a setup for failure, because you're not going to solve autonomous driving in 7 minutes. But we want to see a couple things. First of all, we repeat it 3 times. Write down the instructions, write down your 2 points, write down the instructions you'd give to an autonomous vehicle. And so a number of people, it's kind of like they don't write down the instructions. They don't write down their 2 points. So they're already, if we're looking for people that are instruction followers, we know already that we've got somebody who's not going to follow instructions. And then we just want to see what they do. Like, and we'll ask them questions, like they'll write down things like, usually like, put the car into gear, go forward. If you get to a red light and it's red, stop. If it's green, go. And I'm like, okay, so if it's green and there's a grandmother crossing the street, you run her ass over. And they're like, oh yeah, no, I've got to put a case. And I was like, yeah, okay. So the whole thing is just a logic test to see if you can talk logically. Because I have found over my years that I can refine people's logic, but I can't make them logical. And there's a lot of people out there that logic is not their strength. And the people that work in the computer field generally are more logically, minded, just because that's the way computers work. So that would be one of my things I would say to your comment, Sherwin. Jeremy, I do love that falling forward. Gibson's, thank you. I mean, I do think, as being a human, we do have to work on this stuff, and it's how you handle the adversity that defines people better. And yes, Nigel, I do often tell the story, when my dad bailed me out of jail the second time, he only asked me 2 things. The first thing he asked me was, are you going to learn everything the hard way? And was I hungry? And he took me to McDonald's. So, I do try and tell people, learn from other people's mistakes. That was when I started really getting away from my black hat roots. That's where you'll see, like, if you ever see me at DEF CON, I proudly wore one of the shirts that said, I can never be a white hat because I haven't fought a Balrog. So if you're a Lord of the Rings fan, you get the joke, but if not, I can't be a white hat, and things like that. But all right, enough waxing and waning. Let me talk about this, because I know we're more than halfway through the document thing story, and the memento story. So I do tell people, the doctors in the neurological areas, in the psychological areas, absolutely love the movie Memento. It's complete, utter BS from a medical standpoint, but I really did have the issue where I was not sleeping and I was not producing the chemicals. So I was not converting what they call short-term memories into long-term memories, to the point where we were actually able to go back through my own writings and get to a point where we were able to say, like, about 3 years earlier, I would have no memory whatsoever of having written that document. And I could pass a lie detector test on it. So I am a big fan of writing stuff. I started that, luckily, back in 1993. Real big fans of things like Notes, Keep, Tasks, Wrike, Evernote. I have my own one that I use called Note That, but that's not too important. But the main point is, a friend of mine, I had forgotten something that I had a very didactic memory. I would memorize phone numbers for all of my clients and things like that, thousands of phone numbers, and I forgot one. And he told me this proverb here, and I was like, what does that mean? And he said, it means write shit down. So I took that to heart. I wrote a system for it. I don't care if you use Notepad, but I will tell you that the documenting things is one of the main reasons I was able to recover. I was able to go back and read my own writings. I was able to read my own journals. But as I said, I could pass a polygraph test. The stuff that was written there, it was written in my style, very similar to Memento. If you know the story, I won't ruin it, but did somebody else write this in my style, or did I write it? So documenting things absolutely saved me. It also saved my staff, because they were able to look at everything. They were able to piece together notes very, very clearly. And it's also one of the reasons that I am a very high performing individual, because I'm able to task switch very well, sometimes on things that I haven't even looked at for 6 months, because I try and make sure I understand documenting things. I do teach technical writing for Google, so you can go to the developers.google.com/tech-writing. I'll put it in the note here. And I do talk more about other concepts with writing. But for example, many people who've run startups or businesses have been introduced to something called a minimal viable product, or an MVP. I see some nodding of heads. How many people, you can raise your hand or do a reaction, how many people here have heard of the concept of minimal viable documentation? Yeah, so only a couple, two. Yeah, so minimal viable documentation is what makes engineers happy. I show engineers how they can write down only what they need to write down and how it benefits them. And if you can do that and then build on it, you're going to have a great time with the things. All right, let's see if I can get my slides to go forward. There we go. Now, many of you did mention some things about shedding bad customers. Most people know the quote. It's anecdotal, but I do think it's true that 20% of your customers cause 80% of your problems. So if you have toxic customers, if you are desperate for work, that you're taking every job that comes by your table, that is generally a red flag for me when I come in and help businesses. They need to be able to turn away the customers that aren't paying enough, the customers that are dragging them down, the customers that their employees don't like working with. And, I really do have to tell you guys to fire toxic customers. One of the blessings, and I would say this shed bad customers, I didn't put it as a fail or a pass because it happened naturally. The customers that were complaining and left us while I was gone were not our good customers. So I came back to basically only our good customers staying with us. But I do love telling the story about the asshole tax. So I had a customer, this is long before I got ill, and we fired him. And we just sent a form letter. I'm sorry, we will not be renewing your contract of services, etc. And I get this phone call, very typical of this gentleman. He just calls me whatever time of the day and doesn't say hi, no greeting. Just the first thing I hear is, charge me the asshole tax. And I'm like, who is this? What? And they're like, oh, by the way, any of my stories where I forget the name or I'm not telling the name, they just become Bob. So Bob is like, charge me the asshole tax. He says, I know I'm an asshole. You guys do great work. You need to charge me extra money to put up with me. And that was well over 10 years ago. I think it was closer to 15 years ago. He is still a customer. We charge him more money and it works out well. And we've had similar instances. Like, for example, we had a customer that was incredibly racist and it became a problem. Like, how do we deal with this? We can, of course, call him out and fire him, but he was a partner with like 6 other law firm people who were also our customers. So, if we fired him, what would happen? So we had to think about it. And we also wanted to see what we could do to maybe modify the behavior. So we talked to our staff, especially our staff that was offended by his statements. I think everybody was offended, but personally attacked by his statements. And what we did, we decided to charge, we actually called it a hazard pay. And so we actually charged them more hazard pay, and we paid it to the staff that was offended that had to go out and deal with him. So part of the asshole tax in a different way, but something that did work. But getting rid of those bad customers was really, really helpful because we weren't spending that 80% of time dealing with other things. Now, this one's really long. I will share the slides so you don't have to write these down. I'm not going to go through all of these for the essence of time here, but always be prepared. I think we were pretty well prepared, and there are some things that I think I did very, very well. We're very process driven. We had lots of things documented. We used systems like Passport to store our passwords. We had the multi-user note system. We had powers of attorneys, but some of the things that we did learn from it is we did improve our corporate bylaws. We did improve our annual agenda quite a bit for it. And I don't 100% know if I've got it in here, but I think I do have policies will save you as one of the parachutes. So we'll deal with that later. But, think about the things that are needed if you're gone for a decent amount of time. Even just simple things like, can people pay bills? Do they have the access to recurring charges? I lost some very, important Google Voice numbers, for example, because we didn't have a Google reseller. And I was getting those emails that say, hey, you haven't made a phone call in 60 days. And so I lost some Google Voice numbers that I'll never get back, things like that. So there were some things lost, but I do tell people as well, I was healthy, I did exercise. One of the only reasons I'm alive is because I exercise and I played sports. I'm not an athletic specimen, but I really enjoy soccer, I really enjoy tennis. And I kid you not, in March of 2016, one of the doctors asked my ex-wife if I had ever had a job. And it was very cathartic for her. She broke down. She's like, "What do you mean?" And he was like, "He doesn't look employable." And she told him, I was like, "I fly all around the world. I give speeches. I advise some of the largest companies in the world. I mean, I do cool shit." But, and he was like, he doesn't look like he can walk. And she's like, "Well, he plays like, 2-3 hours of soccer and some tennis every single week." And the doctor literally said, "Yeah, but that was a decade ago." And she's like, "No, that was 3 months ago." So had they not had that call or that conversation, I can tell you my pathway would have been radically different, just because they totally switched from being, this is age-related dementia, to, oh my God, 3 months ago, this guy was, playing soccer and tennis. So anyway, disability insurance, I have become a big fan of it. I do recommend that, people get it. There are some people here from around the world, but for those in the US, I've had a W-2 and paid taxes since I was 14 years old. So at least a couple of years. I ended up not qualifying for any state, any federal, any type of disability insurance, not one penny. And I was unable to work for 15 months. Most people would not be able to survive that. Medical expenses in the US are the #1 cause of bankruptcy. So, something to look at. I also had too many assets to even go bankrupt. So bankruptcy wasn't even an option. But I do like mentioning that I did have long-term disability insurance. I also, very importantly, paid that personally. It was deducted from my paycheck, or I paid it personally with a check. If you do that, it has no taxes on it, at least federally, but in Virginia, it has no taxes as well. That was critical because, it maxes out usually at about $6,000 a month. $6,000 with taxes would have been $4,000. With $6,000, we were able to make ends meet. With $4,000, it would have been sell the house, move, etc., type of things. But I do like telling the story about the postman. And this is something, I'm very nice to everybody. I think it's just my nature. But I always tell delivery people, postal workers, etc., hey, if you need a restroom, if you need some water, whatever, if you need to come out in the sun and sit in air conditioning on my couch for 25 minutes, I don't care. Just knock on the door and, we'll let you in. The postman was a gentleman, couldn't really correspond with him. He didn't speak English as his primary language. So that's why I call him the postman. This postman actually, every Friday, they bring the disability check. My ex would basically wait to get it. She would go get it cashed, and she would then spend the cash because she wasn't very good with finances. It's just not her skill, but she could handle it if she had cash. Some people know that they put money into different piles for different things, and it helps them do their budgeting. But when it's credit cards or amorphous numbers, it just doesn't resonate. So she used cash. Anyway, one Friday, the check doesn't show up, and about 9:30 p.m. The doorbell rings. I hobble down to the door and whatnot. By this time, I'm barely able to walk. And the post office man is there, and he says in broken English that he got all the way back to where they park their cars, which anybody who knows Washington, D.C. is like an hour away from my house. And he saw that the check was there and that my ex would wait for it every single Friday. And he turned around and drove it back in his personal car and handed it to me. Now, I was very pleased with that. I wrote him a wonderful letter and gave him the maximum I could for a Christmas gift that year. And I was very happy because I got a thank you note back from him. And I was telling my oldest son, I was like, I'm finally going to know his name. And I opened the thank you note, and it just said, thank you for your Christmas gift. Your family has always been great to me. Signed, the postman. So I was like, damn it. So I still to this day don't know his name. But I will say disability insurance, and many people know the adage about being nice to the service industry. That plenty of people know the dating thing, like judge your dates by how they treat the waiters and waitresses. This would be a similar thing, and it paid in spades. I mean, there are other things that happened as well that were very nice, but just little things like they would bring the mail to my door because they knew I couldn't walk to the mailbox, small things like that. So corporate policies, this one is upsetting to a lot of people. It's still kind of upsetting to me, and it's been almost 10 years since it occurred. But I do tell people that policies and procedures can absolutely be a lifesaver. One of them is with health insurance. So I am at the critical care unit at Hopkins. I am one level under ICU. Blue Cross Blue Shield sends my insurance broker to the hospital to tell me I am no longer qualified for insurance. The reason I am no longer qualified for insurance is because I am not working full time. And you have to be a full-time employee to qualify for the life insurance benefit. I'm not working full-time because I'm at the effing hospital. So anyway, I remember thinking and could barely get the words out, but I remember just kind of like, do whatever you got to do. I'll let my lawyers deal with it. I do run corporations. One of the things that helped me a lot, by the way, with my disease, I don't talk about this a whole lot, and I don't talk about the specific hospitals, but it was very Kafkaesque for me. Those who know me a little bit, I've worked at federal agencies. I've never done an illegal drug in my life. I don't abuse any other substances. I've held a clearance since, I was a teenager, et cetera. I've never failed a drug test. And, the doctors tried to involuntarily commit me because they were convinced that the only thing that could cause my symptoms was street drugs. So in any case, you can understand that hospitals weren't my friend at the time, is the best way I can put it. There was a love-hate relationship. Hopkins was fantastic. All the individual doctors, with the exception of one or two, were fantastic. But this guy shows up. I remember just telling him, do what you got to do. And I remember just kind of giving rough instructions, like just get it over to the lawyers and get it over to the staff, basically get it over to our HR people to deal with. They at least got them to pause on making the decision. But I still, by the way, for those who haven't had a medical issue, had about $200,000 in debt when I got finished. And that was after insurance covered everything. So it took me about 5 years to cover all that debt and whatnot. Anyway, I'm talking way too long. After the visit, I got on the call with Care First, Blue Cross Blue Shield, and I said, hey, what's going on with this? Why is this the case? And they said, well, you weren't working full time. And I went back to my logic roots and I said, okay, well, if I'm out sick for a day, am I no longer full time? And they went, no, of course not. I said 2 days. They said, no. I said 7 days. They said, and then I said 2 weeks, and they're like, yeah, definitely. And I said, well, what makes the decision if they're full time or not? And I said, and they answered the thing I didn't really know I was looking for this, but it was the aha moment. They said, oh, it's up to your corporate policies. And I was able to pull up our corporate policy that basically said that, should somebody be on medical leave, et cetera. And they said, oh yeah, that's perfect. Your medical leave policy allows this. We don't have to kick you off the full time, et cetera. So literally our policy is what dictated whether or not I was considered a full-time employee during a medical leave, which would determine whether or not I was able to stay on the corporate issued insurance policy. So just something to learn. I don't, hopefully nobody else has to learn it. I hate insurance companies. I won't say anything other than that. You should look at it and, have those policies written down and think about some of the edge cases. We had one just written in there, like what happens if somebody's out on extended medical leave, and we had our policies written for it. I won't tell this parable. I think, I'll just give you the short version. I don't like running companies with equal votes. It's like a marriage, and most marriages fail. So, we had 3 people, and one of them would always vote with the other one, and it became problematic. So I eventually bought out all my partners. But I tell people all the time, like, I like to be a minority. I like to be a majority, but you got to have somebody who's got to make the decision. And it could be a tiebreaker and things like that. But, you have to get, all of these things to happen. But, as I wrote here, I think if you do have stockholders, I will tell people that I have been very blessed that at my companies, I have always tried to push a one person, one vote. So even if somebody owns a very minor percentage and somebody else has a major percentage, they all have a seat at the table. There's always the ability to take it to a veto. But I learned at the Apache Software Foundation that that's not the way to build consensus. And what you're trying to do with most votes is build consensus, get people's inputs, have them feel like they're heard. That worked very well. I will also tell you that today, even more so, but I practice delegation. I tell people like, hey, I'm going to, I want you to handle this, and we're not going to talk again about it for 2 weeks. And if in 2 weeks you come back and ask me a question that you could have answered, I'm going to beat you with a stick. I threaten my staff a lot. No, not really, but I say that I'm going to hit them with sticks a lot. So just something there, but recognize what your type is. I am definitely type A. I have recognized that meetings, and I have to start some meetings by saying, look, I'm one person, one vote. I want everybody's input. Just because you asked me my idea and I've thrown it out there, I don't think it's the right perfect answer. I'm looking for other people to give those ideas. Now, I notice Gibson is rolling his eyes because he's like, Cam doesn't do that at all. But, hey, it's, but I do try. My goal is to build consensus, get other people's input. Especially, I'm white, male, and 50. I'm looking for, young female voices. If I'm looking for a counterpoints, or I'm looking for somebody who's non-technical, or, things like that. So a lot of times I'm seeking out, input from people who are not, like me. I do have that in the ideas as well around knowing your Myers-Briggs type, and talking to people that don't match your Myers-Briggs, personality type. Parachute 9 covered just a lot of little things. I could probably break this into like 20 different parachutes, and there are things, but there were some things like I thought it was obvious that all the important documents would be in the safe. For whatever reason, people were looking all over the place for like 2 weeks for the power of attorney. And I was like sitting there, like, I remember when they finally got me awake and they were to ask me, I was like, did you look in the safe? And somebody went, aha. And I'm like, really? That's the last place you looked? But anyway, it wasn't obvious. So, I've made more points of showing that. I didn't have a plan for things like getting bills paid and doing mail and making sure deposits were made and payroll and things like that. So I have made a point of always making sure I have a deputy. So like, if I'm not available, somebody is always in charge of taking care of that stuff. That has always helped. My wife didn't know about things like retirement funds in an emergency. She was very panicked. We should have notified some of the creditors. I was very pleased. I came back and found out that we only made like 6 late payments in 15 months. But a lot of it is because they didn't know to look for the bills. They didn't know a specific bill, or some of the people switched it to electronic. I did have some banks that even closed accounts because I had no activity for 6 months. And so they were sending emails and nobody was checking those emails. Didn't have a list of insurance policies. My kids, again, my kids were very worried about things. Luckily, they're much older. They survived it, but I was able to talk to them about it. I was like, if you had picked up the phone and told your uncle or your aunt that you needed a ride to soccer practice today at 2 p.m. at this school, or that you needed milk, I said, you now know that there's 60 people you could have reached out to and you would have had a gallon of milk in under an hour. But they weren't expressing their needs very well. They weren't expressing their fears very well. And they weren't having things done like, people taking them shopping for clothes for school and things like that. So just something to think about. What do you call it? I did have a credit card that got compromised and another one that expired, and automatic payments didn't work. So like they changed my credit card, and that's how I lost the Google Voice account, for example, as well as not making a phone call. The banks I already talked about, and I talked about that. But, think about how you can do better than I did. Look at what some of these realities were for me and maybe think about the plans for them. I did talk about this a little bit earlier about eat well and exercise. Don't ignore your health, especially people in startups. They don't do enough. It doesn't take much. I feel even now I can't do competitive sports, but I feel better just going and walking around the mall. And yes, I get an Auntie Annie's cinnamon roll after doing 15 laps of the mall. But hey, not everything's perfect. But the point is, be a little good, or be a little bad, excuse me, because only the good die young. That is my secret to immortality. And something else that I do tell people about is isms and ists. I won't tell the story about Dr. House, but I try and live my life very, not worrying about race, color, sex, socioeconomic status, country of origin, sexual preference, etc. I think one of the things that I loved about the computer world when I started doing BBSs at like age 6 is you're using a handle. Nobody knew anything else about you. And if anything about the elite world is, it's what we would call a meritocracy. You either were good at it or you weren't. And if you were good, nothing else mattered. And so I try and make sure people understand that. I do like pointing out that my definition when I'm teaching ethics and certain things is I point out that isms and ists, racism, sexism, etc., are when you use people's differences to hold them back. For me, for example, going up to a female and saying, hey, I need a female's opinion on this. That's not holding them back. That's not insulting. It's just a realistic statement. Another example that I love, I was at an emergency room, and I get to bring Google in, Paul. So I was at an emergency room and the staff says something. They said, we have a Dr. Google in Bay 13. I don't remember the Bay number, and I was like, oh my God, what's a Dr. Google? And so I asked the staff, I said, what is a Dr. Google? And they said, oh, a Dr. Google is when we have patients that will Google everything about their symptoms and show up having already diagnosed themselves. And they told me a story. They swore it was 100% accurate. And they talked about having to keep a straight face during this talk with the patient. But they went in and had to talk to this man who was a Dr. Google and tell him that, no, sir, you do not have ovarian cancer. So, exactly. But in any case, in a medical context, especially, I am alive today because I had a very tropish German doctor. She's like 4'2", and she literally said, men don't come to the doctors 5 times in a year. And she sent me for an ultrasound. That type of thought process wasn't meant to be insulting. It was just realistic. And she's like, I see you once a year for your annual and that's it. And now I've seen you 5 times in a few months. We need to escalate this. There's more to the story, but that was the important part. Let's see if there's any chats over here. Everybody lies. Yes. The Gregory House. Let's see if we can read it. Kindness is free. I'm trying to find where I last stopped here. Alex, yes, coffee is imperative. Well, caffeine. I'm a tea drinker, though. I was just in London and I learned to start the day with a cup and end it with a pint. So I think I like that quote better. So let's see. Okay, we're back to the customers are stupid. We've talked about that. We've got, okay, Nigel, let's see. Learn from the mistakes of others. Yes, absolutely. Let's see. Oh yeah, that's me putting the tech writing. Identity, yeah, the idiot tax. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and I joke about that. I mean, I teach a lot of stuff around phishing, but I do look for passive aggressive administrators as a problem at companies. They've got to be supportive of the users. I don't mind if they laugh about we've got a PEBCAC error. PEBCAC, for those who don't know, is problem exists between keyboard and chair, things like that. And ID10E tax is the idiot tax, etc. But it's you got to handle that. Yeah, and that is the issue with healthcare. It is a great country. I think there's a lot of benefits and whatnot. Thank you, Brian. Let's see. People have to go talk to their bosses. Apparently, that's more important than listening to my stories. Not sure what that's about. Yeah, everybody lies. Love that quote. Trust. People have to hop off. Thanks, Gibson. All right. So, Paul, here is how you can email me. I also, there's my LinkedIn again. I also do have more parachutes that I've written over the last few years, not as well fleshed out if people want me to go into that or if people have questions, however you want to handle it. So, but hopefully this is informational.
Yeah, no, thank you, Kevin. I think that was a lot more than anybody who joined was actually expecting. So I really appreciate you sharing your journey, your story, and hopefully you're on the up, as we like to say over here in the UK. You mentioned to me, and I can't remember if we actually mentioned it to the audience, that you were currently writing a book based on these stories. Is there a particular date when that may be available, or?
Yeah, so no, I was supposed to actually be on a writing sabbatical at the beginning of this month, and then we ended up having emergencies and I got called back from it. It's long overdue, but the idea behind it was I didn't just want to write a sob story about my medical issue. I also didn't want to go too much into the medical. I wanted to have some reason, and eventually I settled on this idea of the business parachutes. What what worked and what failed for me when I got ill, so that other business people can answer. So unfortunately, I think it's still a bit off from when that will happen. So I do have invitations to talk to a major publisher, and I do have some pretty good drafts, but nowhere near I want to be. So hopefully in the next few months I'll have some information about that.
Excellent. Okay. Are we okay to just open the floor to ask any kind of questions? Anybody want to?
Fine with me. Yeah.
Ask any questions of Kevin. We're going to drop off from LinkedIn now, so I appreciate anybody who joined us on the LinkedIn stream. If you want to enjoy more of these conversations and join some of the ongoing chats, anybody on LinkedIn, please join the community, and we will be sending the link to the LinkedIn group in a moment. But we're going to just leave LinkedIn now, so I'm just going to leave the LinkedIn feed, and then it's just us on the Google Meet. So any questions for Ryan?
Yeah, I was thinking, so when you got the diagnosis, was that through like a regular checkup, or did you see that something is wrong here? I have to go and see what's going on.
It was a long journey. The bad part is effectively my diagnosis at the time was terminal. I am blessed to be alive 10 years later, but I am a massive statistical outlier. As I mentioned, I was the 39th, the other 38 before me. Nobody lasted more than 14 months, and most were diagnosed posthumously. I was also the first medically diagnosed with an actual test. I remember the story, again, much of it in my head because I couldn't form the sentences. But my tests actually, Hopkins couldn't do the tests. My tests were actually sent to Mayo Clinic, another premier hospital in the United States in research in medicine. And it actually came back positive for research. Like it literally said positive for research. And I remember laughing in my head like, oh no, I can't be a guinea pig. And Hopkins had to go back and talk to Mayo and say, what was I positive for? Because I was literally, and certain things that save your life. I am very pro-science. If you want to get me on a rant, get me on the current anti-science political stance in the U.S. But even down to two-word sentences, unable to talk, walk, etc. I still filled out the forms to take my blood and my spinal fluid, and I still filled out the back, flipping it over, which gave them permission to take extra fluids for research purposes. I remember it was 27 vials of blood. I don't remember how many vials of spinal fluid, but it was like a half an hour plus of filling up little vials. And a spinal tap is not a fun, pleasant thing. They have fun things like they tell you if you're feeling tingling in your left foot to tell them, because they can do things like move the needle so that it doesn't hit parts of your nerves. There's actually no risk, by the way, of paralyzation. They do it below the 14th vertebrae, but it's still not a pleasant thing, and they got to worry about infection and things like that into the CSF fluid. But to answer your question, I was tested for a medical research test, came back for that. Now, Hopkins was amazing, and something that when I teach or I talk about my story in a medical or a healthcare environment, I do tell healthcare staff that one of the big things that saved me was the fact that Hopkins was interdisciplinary. I actually got transferred to Hopkins with all of my medical tests filling like an office box of paper, if you know what I'm talking about, like that would hold like the 24 reams of like copier paper. So I had a box like that just filled with medical tests. And I remember getting to Hopkins in the afternoon, and it was like 6:59. I remember looking at the clock because I was starving, because I had been transferred after lunch, and I hadn't filled out the paperwork that you have to fill out at the hospital to get your dinner delivered. And so I didn't get a dinner, and they were off searching. They have these like emergency dinners. And I remember saying, oh, we're not going to see any doctors tonight because the shift change has occurred. And like 2 minutes later, my room filled with like 20 white coats. It was standing room only. And they literally had gone through nothing except for medical tests that I brought with me and 2 other tests. They had done a standard triage. So that's things like, blood pressure, temperature, height, that kind of stuff. And they had done actually 2 tests. They had done a stiff person syndrome, and they had done a standard neurological test. If anybody's ever seen that, that's the thing, like follow my finger, squeeze my fingers, push your leg against this, just standard to see if you have any neurological deficits. Any case, that's the only 3 tests I'd had other than bringing tests with me. Hopkins literally came in and said, we think you have a paraneoplastic disorder. We want to start treatment today. You'll be dead before the tests come back. They were a little kinder about it, but it was pretty blunt. And that's where I found out. But now, March 2015, like I said, terrified of being in a balcony. December, they thought it was my gallbladder. Never recovered from the surgery of the gallbladder. By February, they were talking of 2016. They were talking about involuntarily committing me. In March, I was having more tests. I had 185 doctor's visits that year. So just to put it in perspective, nobody could diagnose it. It was extraordinarily rare. And it took a place like Hopkins to diagnose it. So I have no idea if I answered your question, but I will tell you that I learned from other people with terminal diseases that the day you get diagnosed is oftentimes a very happy day, even when you're told literally that you're going to die, because sometimes you spent years or decades trying to find out what's wrong with you. And you have people who don't believe you. I mean, literally, I was almost involuntarily committed because of my disorder.
Wow.
Anybody else? I have happy stories too, I'm sure. Let's see. We have some chats.
I actually wanted to follow up on that very quickly, because when I were in Sweden last year? Okay, never mind. Recently, I wanted to do my health checkup there, and they said, no, you can't just come in and do a health checkup. That is for, like when even 60, for example, that then you come in, we're going to call you then. So then we moved over to Brazil, not because of this, but we moved over to Brazil. And here, if you pay the money, they do the test. No discussion, right? So we went down to the local healthcare, they did a test, and I came back pre-diabetes. So I would have gone for another 6 years with pre-diabetes, leading to God knows what, if I didn't do these tests. And that's why I ask, because it seems like my wife basically told me we should go and do some tests. We haven't done that for ages. And I said, yeah, let's do that. I don't feel fine. I walk, I don't drink, I have no reason to have diabetes, by the way. I still do. So don't look at yourself in the mirror and think, oh, I'm fit, I'm fine, I'm good. Do that test. Just go and do that test and give them as much blood as you need. Because, just turn the card around like you did, sign the next box too. Let them do all the tests they can, because if they find something out, you better find it now than find it later, really honestly. So that's, yeah. I really like your story there.
Yeah, and I'm not throwing any shade, by the way, on my German doctor. She was the doctor I chose, so I was with her for almost 20 years. But she literally is exactly, like the German. She'd be like, you need to eat better, you need to exercise. She would literally as tropey as you can imagine. But she, every year I went for my doctors. Every year I would do my high adventure forms for Boy Scouts for over 15 years with my boys. So I would have medical tests and everything. But that year I went extra times because I wasn't feeling well. And she was like, men don't come to the doctors. I'm sending you for an ultrasound. That was literally what she said. So, you need to look at the data. You need to go to doctors. You need to be pro-science, And, for example, another doctor that changed my pathway, he called me 2 years later to apologize. And we called him Dr. House. Somebody mentioned Dr. House in the call because his bedside manner was so abrupt. It didn't bug me at all. I'm an engineer. But to give you an idea, this is the gentleman who asked my ex if I had ever had a job. And she's in tears now. And he is just like defending himself. He's like, he doesn't look like he's employable and stuff like that. Everybody knows I'm ugly, but at least I can hold down a job. But that Dr. House was, I was doing an EMG, which is where they hit you with little needles and paddles and make your muscles jump. And, it was about 10 minutes into it, he stopped the test. It was supposed to be an hour and a half long test. And they all leave and they come back in with another machine and they're doing the test some more. And then they all leave and he's gone like an hour. We don't know what's going on. And he comes back in and he's like, I'm sending you to the ER. You're too ill to continue this test. I've been on the phone with the manufacturer. We've never tested anybody who's bad. By the way, I'm a huge fan of electrolytes. I drink electrolytes, and whatnot is a lot of how I stay alive. But anybody who knows a little bit about medicine, so upper body to bottom body was firing at 1.25 seconds later than it should have. And my left to right body was firing 300 to 400 milliseconds off. So things like my heart even staying running. In fact, my heart did crash from my disease and things like that, just because I wasn't even getting neurological, my neurosystem wasn't even working. My electrical was impaired. So thank you for telling your story as well. But yeah, go to the doctors once a year. Get out there and do some walking, do some exercise. Kim, I read your story about your motorcycle crash. So hopefully, yeah, you can learn from this and set it up for success and, that kind of stuff. So, and you woke up at the hospital from it. So, and in a cast in December. Yeah.
Yeah, that was the December accident. Or the end of November.
Yeah. So yeah, it's I'm glad you're with us, and and hopefully you can learn from this. But yeah, I think you can see it, and I will give the slides to Paul that he can share out, and happy to meet with anybody that wants to talk and just think about it. But yeah, it was interesting with my kids and stuff like that, what they were worried about, what they weren't worried about, what they would have been capable of handling, in certain things, and other personality traits. Like, my ex and I, like, for example, I'm a very private person. I didn't want people to know. She's very gregarious, and, she didn't want people, she would have loved people to come visit the hospital. And I was telling people, no, just leave me alone. I'm okay. In hindsight, I would have said, come on down. Shannon would love to have somebody to talk to. So, anyway, I could talk for hours more, Paul, but I know we're at noon. If anybody has one more question.
So we're at the top of the area. I know people are going to drop out. I have another meeting as well, but we'll keep this going if anybody else wants to just stay on. And Molly's got the control, so she will also be staying on just to make sure that the call gets closed correctly. But I want to just thank again Kevin for his time, and everybody else for joining on a a non-Google Workspace related. But I think it's quite important, and also I think a lot of us in the call are either business owners or solopreneurs, and so these kind of stories will hopefully resonate and help people try and put a couple of things in place so that if something does happen, then we could hopefully deal with those kind of ups and downs and as Kevin said, the parachutes that are needed. So with that, I'm going to jump off the call. I'm going to got a customer meeting, but again, thank you very much, Kevin. I appreciate your time.
Absolutely. I think the topic we should start with is people who don't like the new replacement for the GCC, and we'll just leave it at that. So.
Yeah, I think that's a great conversation for next time, which will be at the end of next month.
No, it started. Oh yeah, the next meeting is next month.
And that was yesterday. Well, on the 22nd.
Yes, exactly.
Cheers. Thank you.
All right, everybody. If nobody has any other questions, I'll leave you be. But Michael, I agree. And I actually am diabetic as well now, but it's another type of diabetes called treatment induced, because I had very high doses of steroids as part of what kept me alive. And I don't always talk about that because I don't want people to be like, oh, I shouldn't take steroids. Steroids are a double-edged sword and always have been, and people know it. But like, most people think of high dose steroids like, oh, I was on 30 milligrams and they titered me down to 25 and then 15 and then 5 and then 2.5. I was on 39 grams, so 39,000 milligrams of solumedrol. So a little bit higher dose than the average. So, but I'm alive today because of it, and I don't think I would have survived without it. So,
yeah, I mean, that depends on the situation, right? In your case, that was the way to go.
Absolutely, yeah. And I don't like
listen to our doctors and let them test things, because that's the other thing. I follow a Swedish hospital called Karolinska. They do a lot of experimental stuff, and I'm always thinking, if I had that cancer type, because that's really what they specialize in, would I not be interested in testing? And I would be, really, because if no one tests it, how will we know? And if I have it and nothing worked until now, or you're going to give me 3 months more, but that's it, I'm gonna be in the queue. Test me, please. Really. I mean, we have to get the results. And I also want to be the number 39 out of, not just sitting there saying, okay, I'm doomed.
Yeah. I mean, my disease, they do not know the cause of it. I call it mischief managed. I have to get effectively chemo every few months and, go from there. But let me see. Let's see. Anti-BPPX, potentially treatable, something like that. This is stuff that I've been in 4 medical papers now. I didn't spell treatable correctly there. But this is my doctor. That's Dr. Probasco at Johns Hopkins. I probably will only be able to show you the abstract here, but this is the. Let's see. I gotta accept a bunch of stuff blindly to get cookies. This is because of my treatment. And this was written now. That was written when they got me onto that treatment, and it seemed to be working. And now, 8 years later, it's proven. But this was written, I think I was diagnosed May 8th of 2016. So this is to the year later that it was working and things like that. So lots of fancy words and stuff like that. And they talk about the median ages and stuff like that. And you can, see the 29 treated, how many people were presumed dead, et cetera. So, this is where you can go read the numbers. Anytime you see a 43-year-old male, that's me. In the studies and stuff like that. But this is directly from my doctors, and I was very pleased to be basically the case study for how they might be able to treat it for others. So
yeah, it's a what do we call it? It's a catching and scaring story at the same time. I mean, we don't want to get the news like that, but something that definitely I'm using something I call the white envelope. I used to work in the insurance industry. Don't blame me, but I did.
Sorry.
Early ages, yeah. So
not everybody's perfect.
Life insurance. And something I taught my customers, me being, I don't have beard yet, but anyway, back then I really had nothing. So I told them you have to create a document pile of what happens if you go, what happens if she go, and so on. So the white envelope. And then you make sure you have a set of copies. One is stored at your company in your safe. One is stored with your lawyer. And I realized sitting here talking, I didn't actually do all that myself yet. I still have to do a lot of those things. So
for those who want to know what he's talking about, this is what I call the green binder. So there's a copy in my safe and a copy here, and my executor has a copy as well, just to make sure everything's. But yeah, and you might be interested as well. Another little thing that you will probably understand a little bit more. But for example, I had life insurance policies that I had to have for contracts as a critical employee thing. So I had a couple $1 million in policies. I lost all my policies but one. And we thought that all the policies had a disability rider, and we were actually able to go back to the original application forms and show that the disability rider was on there. What that means is there was supposed to be a thing that if I became disabled, the policy would be auto paid for. Even though it was checked on the box, it was not put into what you would call the binder, which most people never look at. And they argued that it was our responsibility to check the binder, and therefore they weren't obligated to honor the disability. So I lost. So right now I have no life insurance, and I will never get another life insurance policy. And I had to switch to whole life, which is very expensive every month. And that's just enough so that, and I'll probably drop the policy in another few years once I believe my kids are all old enough and taken care of. They've all graduated college now. One is off into the world, has his own job, makes money. Once the other two are at that standpoint, I'll probably let the policy go. But it costs me about $700 a month to have a $250,000 policy. And the only reason I even have that one is because it was one of the policies that had a disability rider. And then before it hit a 10-year plateau, which is where it would re-rate, I was able to convert it to whole life. If I had not converted it to whole life when it re-rated, it would have been like $8,000 a month.
Yeah. Okay. And add to that. So that's true. Check your policy when you get the policy, the final policy in the mail. Read it and check what happens if you become disabled or unable to pay fully or yes, partially. Because it also ties back to what you said. You're not working full time, so now you're no longer eligible. The other thing you should check when it comes to this insurance is the value. A life insurance at $100,000 back 20 years ago, that was quite a lot of money. That 100,000 doesn't go anywhere today.
No.
So make sure it also have indexing. So there's a few things you want to be built in automatically in your life insurance or what other kind of insurance policy for compensation. And also terminally, I mean, if you're working in a company, you're running the company, you are the income bringer. You should also have an insurance and make sure that compensates your loss of income in case you are not working any longer full or part-time, which is also indexed.
Yeah, the long-term
so
disability. Yeah, that's long-term disability was a lifesaver.
Super expensive.
I'm glad I had it.
Definitely worth it.
It wasn't. I mean, I'll tell you guys. I mean, not getting political or religious here, but you know, I have mine from the Knights of Columbus. I like the Knights of Columbus as far as an insurance company because the reason the Knights of Columbus exists is to take care of widows and orphans. That's why it was founded. It's a Catholic fraternal organization for those who don't know. But you know, their long-term disability, it costs me still to this day $1,153 a year. So, and it pays up to $6,000 a month, you know, for long-term. And so I actually have 2 long-term disability policies. Both of them are capped at 6,000. I have no idea why. That seems to be the magic number in the U.S. right now is that 6,000 number. But yeah, it was the difference between bankruptcy. You know, and I sold assets. I sold one of my office buildings. Is how we survived for 15 months and made payroll and everything.
Yeah, but like Kim points out there, the insurance company, they are businesses, and they are actually there to make money. So they don't do that because of their very warm heart.
Yeah. And they're not always right.
I mean, what they sign with us.
I don't get it. I could get into horror stories. I'll leave insurance companies alone. Let me see if there's any final questions. Yeah, that isn't private. Yeah, I mean, you're totally right, Kim. All right. Well, I am going to run. I need to get on some other work and whatnot. But if this is helpful, please reach out if I can help in any way. You know, I don't ever like to use any fear, uncertainty, and doubt. But you know, you don't know. Kim had a very serious accident. You know, I think he's looking at this from that case. And I look at my employees as my children too. So I want to make sure they're taken care of. I thought I had it well, but I learned some stuff when I got ill. So learn from my mistakes. All right. Bye,
Thanks a lot, Kevin.
Thanks, Kevin.
Thank you.